I've lived long enough to notice how people treat those who can't give them anything back. Watch a room, you'll see who gets greeted and who gets passed by. The ones at the edges. The ones nobody needs. I saw it happen once at a harvest dance in Montana, 1882. What I witnessed that night stayed with me. The fiddle hit its first note, and Jesse Callahan pressed his back against the wall. 14 steps to the door. He knew. Boot heels on wood, laughter, rose water and tobacco smoke. Someone brushed past a woman. Her sleeve caught his elbow. She didn't stop. His fingers found a nail head in the pine boards. Cold iron. He traced it like a man might trace a scar. Poor Jesse Callahan. The whisper came from his right. Used to be the best rider in the county. Ain't nobody gonna dance with a blind man. His jaw tightened. His cane found the floor. 1 step. 2. He reached for the door. Wherever you're listening from tonight, a porch in Texas, a kitchen table in Ohio, drop a comment and let me know. If you've been enjoying these stories, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. The water in the basin had gone cold. Clara Whitmore wrung out the cloth and wiped the stage dust from her neck, her wrists, the hollow of her throat. 6 days on the road from Nebraska. Her skin still carried the grit of it. "There's a harvest dance tonight," Mrs. Harmon said from the doorway. "Whole town goes. You ought to come. Meet folks." Clara looked at the one good dress hanging on the peg, indigo wool, patched at the hem where she'd caught it on a fence post 2 winters back. Thomas had laughed at her for it. She pulled the dress over her head and didn't answer. The dance hall smelled of kerosene and sweat, and something sweet apple cider. Maybe. Or the last of the summer peaches. Clara stood near the door while Mrs. Harmon pointed out names. The mayor's wife, the blacksmith, the widow Turner, who'd buried 3 husbands and was said to be looking for a 4th. And that one there, Mrs. Harmon's voice dropped. Jesse Callahan lost his sight 2 years back. Lightning spooked his horse. Fell on rocks. Tragic, really. Used to be the best rider in the county. Clara followed her gaze. A man stood alone by the far wall. Tall. Shoulders like he'd carried weight his whole life. One hand gripped a cane, the other pressed flat against the pine boards behind him. He turned toward the door, started walking. Something in the set of his jaw, the way he moved, careful, measured, like a man crossing a frozen river and listening for cracks. Clara's feet were moving before she decided to move them. The fiddle kept playing, voices hushed. She felt the stares like heat on her skin. Clara Whitmore. She stopped in front of him, close enough to smell the soap on his collar, the leather of his boots. "Just got in today." His head turned toward her voice, eyes the color of river stones. They didn't quite find her face. "Ma'am? I ain't much of a dancer." She held out her hand. "You—" A pause. His throat worked. "Used to be." "Well?" She waited. "Reckon we'll figure it out." His fingers found hers, calluses on calluses. His hands shook once, then steadied. The fiddle shifted to a waltz. Clara stepped closer. Behind her, the whispers stopped, and across the room, a man in a fine coat leaned toward Mrs. Harmon, his pocket watch chain catching the lamplight. His eyes never left Jesse Callahan's back. The music faded behind them as they stepped onto the boardwalk. Jesse's cane found the edge of the step. 1 down, 2. The night air hit his face cold, sharp, carrying the smell of wood smoke and frost. "I can walk you to the boarding house," he said, "if you point me the right direction." Clara's footsteps stopped beside him. "I ain't ready to go back yet. Too many questions waiting in there." He understood that. the weight of other people's curiosity, their pity dressed up as concern. "There's a bench," he said. "Mercantile porch, 50 yards up." They walked. His cane tapped the boards. Her boots made a softer sound. Worn heels, he guessed. The kind of shoes that had seen hard use. When they reached the porch, his hand found the railing. Frost on the wood, thin as paper. "Here." Clara's voice came from his left, the creak of a rocking chair settling under weight. He found the second chair by feel and lowered himself into it. The cold seeped through his coat. Somewhere down the street, a wagon rattled past the last one leaving the dance. Then silence. Just the wind moving through the eaves and the distant lowing of cattle in someone's pen. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Nebraska. Had a homestead outside of Broken Bow." Had a pause. Her chair creaked once. "Buried my husband 6 months back. Fever. 3 days and he was gone." Jesse turned his head toward her voice. The words sat between them, plain and heavy. "I'm sorry. Don't be." Her voice didn't waver. "I didn't come here for sorry. I came here to stop hearing it." He knew that too. The way sorry started to sound like a door closing, like people wanted you to hurry up and heal so they could stop feeling uncomfortable. "What happened to the homestead?" "Went to Thomas's brother. There wasn't room for a widow, not one without children. Anyway." She shifted in her chair. His wife made that clear enough. The wind picked up. A shutter rattled somewhere down the street. Jesse pulled his coat tighter and waited. "What about you?" Clara asked. "Mrs. Harmon told me about the accident, but she didn't tell me much else." Jesse's finger found the head of his cane. Smooth wood, worn by 2 years of use. His father's cane. Before that, handed down like everything else that mattered. "Horse threw me, lightning storm, 2 summers back. Hit my head on a rock when I fell." He kept his voice flat. "Facts. Nothing more. Woke up 3 days later and everything was black. Doctor said the swelling might go down. It didn't." Clara didn't say sorry. She didn't say anything for a long moment. "What do you miss?" The question caught him. Most people asked what he could still do, what he needed help with, how he managed. Nobody asked what he missed. "Sunrises." The word came out before he could stop it. "The way light comes over the mountains. Pink first, then gold. The way it hits the snow on the peaks." Silence. The chair beside him creaked. "I could tell you," Clara said, "what they look like, if you wanted." His throat tightened. He didn't trust his voice, so he nodded. "The stars are out now," she said, "thick as spilled salt, and there's frost on the railing. You can see it shining where the lamplight catches it from the window behind us." He listened. Her voice was low, steady, not trying to pretty anything up. Just telling him what was there. "The mountains are just shapes right now, dark against darker. But you can see where the snow line starts. It's like someone drew a white line across the ridges." Jesse leaned back in his chair. The cold didn't bother him as much now. "You've got a good eye," he said. "I've got 2 of them. Figured I might as well use them." He almost laughed. The sound caught in his chest like something long unused. They sat without talking for a while. The wind settled. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and went quiet. Jesse listened to Clara's breathing slow and even, like someone who'd learned to keep still when the world got too loud. "You said you needed to stop hearing sorry," he said finally. "What did you come here to find instead?" Her chair stopped rocking. I don't know yet. Something different. Somewhere nobody knows my name or my story. A pause. Somewhere I can figure out what comes next without everybody watching to see if I fall apart. Jesse nodded. He understood that better than he could say. It's cold, Clara said. I ought to get back. He stood. Old habit made him offer his arm the way his father had taught him, the way a gentleman did. Then he remembered. His hand dropped. I ain't got good eyes in the dah, neither, Clara said. Her fingers found his elbow. You mind? He didn't answer, just started walking. The boardwalk stretched ahead of them. His cane found the rhythm. Her boots kept pace beside him. At the corner, she guided him left with a slight pressure on his arm. 2 steps down here, she said. He took them. Didn't stumble. You know your way around pretty well, she said. For a man who can't see. I've had 2 years to learn the town by feel. What about your place? Mrs. Harmon said you've got a ranch. 5 miles out? Jesse's jaw tightened. I've got a land. Whether it's still a ranch is another question. They walked in silence. The boarding house came up faster than he expected, the smell of wood smoke and cooking grease, the creak of a screen door in the wind. This is it, Clara said. She let go of his arm. Jesse stood on the bottom step. His cane found the railing. Thank you, Clara said. For the dance and the rest. You're the one who crossed that floor, not me. I reckon we both took a chance. He heard her boots on the steps. 1, 2, 3. The screen door opened. Miss Whitmore. She stopped. That's sunrise, he said. The offer still stand. A pause. Then I'm up early. You tell me where to find you, and I'll be there. The door closed behind her. Jesse stood in the dark, the cold seeping into his bones, and tried to remember the last time someone had offered him anything that wasn't pity. The walk back to the livery where he'd left his horse took longer than usual. His mind kept circling back to her voice, the way she described the stars, the way she didn't flinch when he told her about the accident. He was halfway to the stable when he heard footsteps behind him. Heavy boots. A man's stride. Callahan? He stopped. The voice belonged to Gideon. He'd know that honeyed tone anywhere. Word travels fast, Gideon said, stepping closer. The whole town's talking about you and that widow. You might want to be careful there, Jesse. A blind man's got enough troubles without adding a woman to the list. Jesse's hand tightened on his cane. What do you want? Gideon, just being neighborly. The smile was audible. But since you ask, I've been meaning to talk to you about that land of yours. Winter's coming. Man in your condition ought to think about his options. The footsteps retreated. A door opened and closed somewhere down the street. Jesse stood alone in the dark. Gideon's words hanging in the air like the first cold breath of a coming storm. The livery horse was a bay mare with a crooked blaze and a habit of pulling left. Clara kept a steady hand on the reins as the road wound out of town, past the church with its whitewashed steeple, past the cemetery on the hill, past the last cluster of houses where smoke rose thin and gray against the morning sky. 5 miles. Mrs. Harmon had given her directions over breakfast, her voice carrying that particular mix of curiosity and disapproval. I don't know what you're thinking. Going out there alone, a young widow, visiting a bachelor. People will talk. Let them talk. Clara had stopped caring about that the day she buried Thomas. The Callahan ranch came into view around a bend in the road. She pulled the mare to a stop and looked. Fence posts leaning like drunk men, Rails down in 3 places she could count from here. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Weeds choked the garden plot beside the house, what had once been a garden. Anyway, now it was just a tangle of dead stalks and frost-blackened leaves. The house itself sat low and dark. No smoke from the chimney, no lamp in the window. But there was sound. A rhythmic thunk coming from somewhere behind the barn. Clara nudged the mare forward. Jesse stood by a stump, axe in hand. He'd stripped down to his shirt sleeves despite the cold. His breath came out in white puffs as he swung. The blade hit the wood with a crack that echoed off the hills. He reached down, found the split pieces by feel, and set another log on the stump. Thunk. His aim was perfect. Every stroke landed true. Clara dismounted and tied the mare to a fence post that still had some strength in it. Her boots crunched on the frozen ground. Jesse's head turned at the sound. Who's there? Clara Whitmore. He lowered the axe. Sweat darkened his collar despite the chill. His chest rose and fell, breath evening out. You're a long way from town. Miss Whitmore. 5 miles ain't far. She looked around at the state of things. The rust on the hand pump by the well, the pile of unsplit logs that would take him weeks to work through alone. Mrs. Harmon says you're stubborn as a mule and twice as dumb. A sound came from his throat, almost a laugh. She ain't wrong. Clara walked closer. The smell of fresh-cut wood hung in the air, sharp and clean. Jesse's hands gripped the axe handle, rope-burned palm. She noticed calluses thick as leather. I need work, she said. You need hands? That ain't charity. It's a trade. His jaw tightened. The axe swung down and buried itself in the stump. I don't need help. The fence says different. So does that barn door. So does the garden that's gone to seed and the cattle I can see wandering loose on that far ridge. Jesse's head turned toward the ridge she'd mentioned. His nostrils flared slightly, like he was testing the wind. How many head you count? Clara squinted. The cattle were small shapes against the brown grass, clustered near a stand of cottonwoods. Maybe 30, hard to tell from here. 31. He tilted his head, listening to something she couldn't hear. One of them's got a wheeze. 3rd from the left of that big tree, hear it? She strained her ears. Nothing but wind. She'll need watching, Jesse said. Lung trouble. Gets worse in the cold. Clara stared at him. How in the... Ears work fine, ma'am. He pulled the axe free from the stump. Eyes are just one way of seeing. She let that sit for a moment. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of coming weather, something metallic, something cold. You know anything about cattle? Jesse asked. Some. We had a small herd back in Nebraska. Fencing, I can learn. He said nothing for a long moment. His hand found the axe handle again, fingers wrapping around the worn wood. One day, he said finally, you work one day. If you can't keep up, you go back to town and don't come out here again. Fair enough? Tools are in the barn, left side, 3rd shelf from the bottom. Everything's got its place. Don't move anything. Clara found the barn by following the crooked door. Inside, the smell of hay and leather and old dust filled her nose. Light came through gaps in the boards, falling in stripes across the dirt floor. She found the shelf he'd mentioned hammer, nails in a tin can, wire cutters, a coil of baling wire. Everything arranged with careful precision. She gathered what she needed and went back outside. The first hour was hard. Jesse's system made no sense to her at first, the way he arranged things by feel. every implement in its exact place so his hands could find it in the dark. She knocked over a bucket of nails and spent 10 minutes gathering them from the dirt while he stood with his arms crossed, saying nothing. But by midday, something shifted. She learned to describe what she saw in plain words, not pretty, not poetic, just facts. The rails cracked about a foot from the left post. Split clean through, Jesse ran his fingers along the wood, found the break, nodded. "Hand me the hammer." She found it on the workbench, right where he'd said it would be. When she pressed the handle into his palm, their fingers touched. His hand was warm despite the cold. He didn't pull away. "Hold the rail steady, he said. "I'll feel for the nail." She braced the wood while he drove the nail home. 3 strokes. The sound rang out across the empty pasture. They moved to the next section, then the next. Clara's shoulders burned. Blisters formed on her palms where the rough wood scraped against skin gone soft from months of inactivity. She didn't complain. The sun was low when they finished 20 feet of solid rail. Standing straight for the first time in what looked like months, Jesse ran his hand along the top rail, testing. His fingers found the joints where they'd spliced new wood to old. "Not bad," he said. "Not bad." Clara wiped her forehead with her sleeve. "I've got blisters on my blisters." "That'll toughen up." He turned toward the house. "There's coffee inside. Stove's cold. But I can get it going." The cabin was dark and close. She could make out a table, 2 chairs, a bed pushed against the far wall. Everything neat. Everything in its place. The iron stove sat cold and black in the corner. "Matches are on the shelf above the basin," Jesse said. "Kindling's in the box beside the stove." She found both. The match flared bright in the darkness, and for a moment she could see his face clearly, the lines around his eyes, the set of his mouth. He stood very still, head tilted, listening to the sound of her moving through his space. The kindling caught. Smoke curled up the chimney. "I'll be back tomorrow," Clara said. Jesse didn't answer right away. He stood by the stove, warming his hands over the growing flame. "That cow with the wheeze," he said finally. "She's got a calf, young one. If the mother goes down, the calf won't make it through winter alone." Clara understood what he wasn't saying, the question underneath the words. "Then I reckon we better make sure she doesn't go down." She was almost to the door when his voice stopped her. "Miss Whitmore, that man at the dance, the one in the fine coat, he say anything to you?" Clara's hand rested on the door frame. The cold seeped in through the cracks. "No. Why?" Jesse's face was half in shadow, half lit by the glow of the stove. "No reason. Just be careful of what you say to folks in town. Not everybody wishes me well." The coffee was hot and bitter. Clara wrapped her fingers around the tin cup and let the warmth seep into her bones. The porch boards creaked under the rocking chair as she settled into the rhythm of morning. 2 weeks now, 2 weeks of riding out at first light, working until her shoulders ached, learning the shape of a blind man's world. Jesse sat in the chair beside her, his own cup balanced on his knee. Steam rose into the cold air. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. A sound came from the pasture. Hoofbeats, slow and uneven. Jesse's head turned toward it before Clara even registered the noise. "That's Bessie coming in," he said. "Hear how she favors the left front. Has since she was a calf. Stepped in a gopher hole when she was 6 months old. Never quite healed right." Clara squinted at the approaching shape. A brown cow with a white patch on her flank, walking with a slight hitch in her gait. "How do you tell them apart? By sound? Sound? Smell?" the weight of their step. Jesse took a sip of his coffee. Every animal's got a signature. You just have to learn to read it. The cow reached the fence and stopped, her big brown eyes fixed on Jesse. She lowed once, a deep rumbling sound. "She's asking for grain," Jesse said. "Spoiled thing. My mother used to hand-feed her when she was small." Clara watched the cow wait at the fence, patient and expectant. "Your mother raised her, raised half this herd. She had a way with animals, could calm a spooked horse just by talking to it." Jesse's voice went flat. "She passed 6 years back. Fever." Clara nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Fever doesn't care who it takes." "No, it doesn't." They finished their coffee in silence. The sun climbed higher. The frost on the grass began to melt, releasing the smell of wet earth and dead leaves. "The hills are turning," Clara said. "Gold now, like honey when you hold it to the light." Jesse went still. His cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "I remember that," he said quietly. "The way it looked." She didn't say anything else. Just let him have the memory. "We should check the herd," Jesse said after a moment. "That cow with the lung trouble, I want to hear how she's doing." They saddled the horses, Clara's borrowed mare and Jesse's gray gelding, a steady animal who knew the land better than most men. Jesse moved with practiced ease, his hands finding buckles and straps without hesitation. Muscle memory held what sight had lost. The ride out to the north pasture took half an hour. Clara described what she saw as they went the creek running low. The aspens shedding their last yellow leaves, the hawk circling lazy overhead. "Redtail," Jesse said when she mentioned the hawk. "This is his territory. Been hunting this stretch since I was a boy." They found the herd scattered across the slope, grazing on the brown autumn grass. Clara counted heads while Jesse listened. 31 when she confirmed, "All present. The sick one, where is she?" Clara scanned the herd. "East side, standing apart from the others, near that big rock." Jesse nudged his horse forward. Clara followed. As they drew closer, she could hear what he must have heard from 50 yards back, a wet, rattling wheeze with every breath the cow took. "She's holding," Jesse said. His jaw relaxed slightly. "Not worse than yesterday." "What do we do for her?" "Keep her fed, keep her calm, watch the calf." He turned his head toward a smaller shape standing close to the sick cow's flank. "If she goes down, we'll have to bottle feed. You've done that before." "Some. We had a few orphans back in Nebraska." "Good." They sat on their horses, watching the herd settle into the afternoon. The wind moved through the grass, bending the stems in long, slow waves. Jesse dismounted suddenly. Clara watched as he crouched, his palm hovering just above the ground. "Feel this," he said. She swung down from her saddle and knelt beside him. The grass moved under her fingers, all pointing the same direction. "Storm coming," Jesse said. "Soon, maybe before the week's end. The cattle know. See how they're drifting east, moving toward the sheltered ground." Clara looked up at the sky. Clear blue. Not a cloud anywhere. "You sure?" "The grass tells you. The animals tell you. You just have to listen." They rode back as the sun began to set. The sky went pink, then orange, then deep purple at the edges. Clara described each change while Jesse listened. His face turned toward the light he couldn't see. When they reached the cabin, he unsaddled the horses while she built up the fire. The routine was familiar now. She set his coffee cup in the same spot she always did, left side of the table. 2 inches from the edge, Jesse came in, hung his hat on the peg by the door, and walked to the table. His hand reached out, found the cup. First try. He paused, lifted the cup, took a sip. You always put it in the same place, he said. Figured you'd learn where to find it. Something passed across his face, gone before she could name it. After supper, beans and cornbread. Nothing fancy. They sat on the porch again. The stars came out thick and bright, scattered across the black sky. Clara pulled her coat tighter against the cold. Jesse reached into his pocket and pulled out a harmonica. Silver, dented, worn smooth by years of handling. He raised it to his lips and played. The melody was old, simple. The kind of tune that lived in the bones of a place passed down from fathers to sons, hummed over campfires and plowed fields. Clara found herself humming along. She didn't know the words, but her body knew the shape of the song. Jesse lowered the harmonica. My pa taught me that one. Said a man who can't make music ain't got no business on a ranch. Your pa sounds like mine. Clara pulled her knees up to her chest. He used to say a farm without singing was just dirt. Jesse nodded slowly. The harmonica caught the starlight, glinting silver in the dark. I ain't played for anyone since the accident, he said. Didn't see the point. What changed? He didn't answer. Just raised the harmonica and played again. The notes drifted out across the empty land, mixing with the wind and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. Clara listened. Her eyes burned, but she didn't wipe them. She just sat in the dark with a man who could see more than most, and let the music fill the spaces where words wouldn't fit. The song ended. Jesse lowered the harmonica. Storm's coming, he said again. We'll need to move the herd closer before it hits. Get the sick cow into the barn if we can. Clara looked up at the clear sky, the bright stars, the peaceful dark. 3 days later, the sky turned black, and with it came a rider from town, carrying news that would test everything they'd built. The general store smelled of pickles and kerosene and the sharp tang of tobacco from the barrel by the counter. Clara set her basket on the worn wood and waited while Mr. Pemberton weighed out the flour. Behind her, the bell over the door jingled. Footsteps, whispers. That's her, someone said. A woman's voice. Low, but not low enough. The one who's been going out to the Callahan place every day. Clara kept her eyes on the scale. The needle trembled, then settled. 5 pounds, Mr. Pemberton said. He didn't meet her eyes. Anything else? Coffee, salt, a tin of lard. He gathered the items slowly. The whispers continued behind her, a constant murmur like water over stones. Mrs. Harmon appeared at her elbow. The older woman's face was pinched with concern, or something that wanted to look like concern. People are talking, dear. Her voice carried that false sweetness Clara had learned to recognize. A young widow, living out there with a bachelor. It ain't proper. Clara counted out the coins for her purchase. I work for Mr. Callahan, same as any hired hand. That's not how folks see it. Then folks can mind their own business. She gathered her supplies and walked out. The bell jingled behind her. The whispers followed her through the door and down the steps and all the way to where she'd tied the mare. The ride back took longer than usual. Clara's thoughts kept circling. What people said, what people thought, the way they looked at her in town, the women with their tight smiles, the men with their sideways glances. She'd left Nebraska to escape this. The pity, the judgment, the constant weight of other people's expectations pressing down like a hand on her chest. And now it was starting again. The Callahan Ranch came into view around the final bend. Clara pulled the mare to a stop. A horse stood tied to the porch rail, A fine animal bay coat brushed to a shine, silver fittings on the bridle. Not a working horse, a rich man's horse. Clara's stomach tightened. She dismounted and tied the mare beside the bay. Voices drifted through the open door of the cabin. One she recognized as Jessie's, low, flat, controlled. The other was smoother, oiled, like expensive leather. "I'm trying to help you, Jessie," Gideon's voice carried through the door. "Everybody can see you're struggling out here. Winter's coming. You'll lose half that herd before spring." Clara moved closer. Through the gap in the door, she could see Gideon standing by the cold stove, his fine coat unbuttoned, his hat in his hands. Jessie sat at the table, his back rigid, his knuckles white where they gripped his cane. "Sell to me now," Gideon continued. "Fair price. Quick sale. Move to town where folks can look after you." Jessie's jaw worked. "Get off my land, Gideon? Now, Jessie." "I said get off." Gideon sighed. The sound was theatrical, practiced. "I'm just being neighborly, trying to spare you the humiliation of losing everything piece by piece. But if you want to be stubborn about it," he shrugged. "Winter doesn't care about pride." He walked toward the door. Clara stepped back, but not far enough. Gideon emerged onto the porch and stopped when he saw her. His smile was thin. His eyes moved over her the way a man might appraise livestock at auction. "Ma'am," he tipped his hat, "you might want to think about your reputation. A woman in your position can't afford to be careless." He mounted his horse and rode off without looking back. The hoofbeats faded into the distance. Swallowed by the wind, Clara stood on the porch. Her hands shook. She pressed them flat against her skirt and waited until they stopped. Then she went inside. The cabin was dark. The stove sat cold in the corner. No fire lit despite the chill in the air. Jessie hadn't moved from the table. His coffee cup sat untouched beside him, the surface gone flat and gray. "Jessie?" He didn't answer. Clara crossed to the shelf above the basin. Her fingers found the matchbox. The strike of the match was loud in the silence, a sharp scratch. Then the flare of light. She lit the lamp. Yellow flame caught the wick and spread, pushing back the darkness. "Maybe he's right." Jessie's voice was quiet, hollow. "Maybe I'm just fooling myself, thinking I can run this place, thinking anything's going to be different." Clara set the lamp on the table. The light caught the lines on his face, the shadows under his eyes. He looked older than his 40 years. "You gonna let that snake decide what you're worth?" His head turned toward her voice. Those riverstone eyes, searching for something they couldn't see. "It ain't about what he says. It's about what's true." Jessie's hand released the cane and pressed flat on the table. "I can't see the fence posts rotting, can't see the cattle drifting, can't see the roof when it starts to leak. Everything I know about this place comes through other people's eyes now. Your eyes." Clara pulled out the chair across from him and sat. So what happens when you leave? When you find something better? When the winter gets hard and you decide you'd rather be warm in town than freezing out here with a blind man who can't even light his own stove some days?" His voice cracked on the last word. He turned his face away. Clara sat very still. The lamp flame flickered in a draft from the window. Outside, the wind was picking up that same wind that had bent the grass days ago. "I buried my husband in the ground," she said. "Watched them shovel dirt on the box that held him. Stood there while his brother told me I wasn't welcome in my own home anymore." Jessie's head turned back toward her. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. I stayed because—" She stopped, drew a breath. I stayed because you're the first person in 6 months who looked at me like I was something other than a problem to be solved. The wind pushed against the walls. The lamp flame steadied. You ain't fooling yourself, Clara said. You're working harder than any man I know. We're making something here, together. Jesse's hand found his coffee cup, lifted it, set it down without drinking. Gideon won't stop, he said. He wants this land, has for years. He'll keep pushing until I break or until I sell. Then don't break. Easy to say. Never said it was easy. Said it was worth doing. The wind rose higher. The first drops of rain began to patter against the roof, the storm arriving just as Jesse had said it would. Clara stood and moved to the stove. I'll get a fire going. You look like you could use something hot. She was reaching for the kindling when Jesse spoke again. Clara. She stopped. That cow with the lung trouble. The one we've been watching. His voice had changed. Not anything sharp in it now. Alert. What about her? Jesse's head tilted, listening to the rain. I didn't hear her this morning. When we did the count, I heard the calf, but not the mother. Clara's hand froze on the kindling box. The rain's going to flood that low pasture where she beds down. If she's already weak, if she's gone down. The wind slammed against the cabin walls. The lamp flame guttered and danced. The calf, Clara said. Jesse was already reaching for his coat. The rain hit like a wall, cold, hard, driving into Clara's face until she couldn't see 3 feet ahead. This way! Jesse's voice cut through the roar. He moved ahead of her, his cane abandoned somewhere back at the barn, both hands reaching out to feel the fence line. They found the sick cow first, down in the mud of the low pasture, her sides heaving, breath rattling wet in her chest. The calf stood beside her, bawling a thin, terrified sound, and that the wind tore away almost before it reached Clara's ears. But that wasn't the worst of it. The fence was down. The section they'd mended together 3 weeks ago, rails scattered in the mud like broken bones. And beyond, in the darkness and the rain, the rest of the herd had scattered across the open range. How many got through? Jesse shouted. Clara strained to see. Shapes moved in the darkness, cattle running blind, spooked by the storm. 10, maybe 12. I can't tell. Jesse turned toward the sound of hooves, his head tilted, listening through the rain. They're heading for the creek. If they reach the bank, they'll bunch up. We can drive them back. They ran. The mud sucked at Clara's boots with every step. She stumbled, caught herself, kept going, ahead of her. Jessie moved with a sureness that seemed impossible, navigating by sound, by feel, by some instinct she couldn't name. The creek came up fast, swollen with rain, brown water churning over rocks that had been dry yesterday. The cattle milled at the edge, lowing and jostling, too frightened to cross, but too panicked to hold down still. Get around behind them, Jessie yelled. Push them toward the gate. Clara circled wide, her lungs burned and her legs burned. The rain plastered her hair to her face and ran down her collar and soaked through every layer she wore. She waved her arms, shouted. The cattle startled and began to move slowly at first, then faster. Jesse stood at the far side, clapping his hands, creating a wall of sound to funnel them back toward the broken fence. One cow broke left. Clara lunged to cut her off. Her boot caught a root hidden in the mud. She went down hard. The mud was cold, thick. It closed over her hands and knees, sucking at her clothes as she tried to push herself up. The cow ran past, spraying more mud across her face. She wiped her eyes, spat. kept moving. They worked through the darkness. One cow at a time, one stubborn, panicked animal after another. The rain never let up. Clara's voice went hoarse from shouting. Her hands turned numb. The cold seeped into her bones until she couldn't feel where her body ended and the storm began. The last cow went through the gate. Jesse wired it shut, his fingers working by feel, twisting the wire tight around the post. Then he stopped. His shoulders dropped. His head bowed. Rain ran down his face and dripped from his chin. "The fence," he said. His voice was flat, empty. "The section that I should have checked it. I knew the posts were weak on that side. I should have, yeah. It wasn't your fault." He turned toward her, and even in the darkness she could see the set of his jaw. "You did what I told you. I'm the one who should have known better. Should have felt the rot in the wood. Should have, Jesse, and this ain't gonna work." The words came out ragged, torn. "I'm holding you back, dragging you down into my mess, and you should go. Find a real life somewhere. Stop wasting your time on a blind man who can't even—" His boot slipped on the wet ground. His arms windmilled once, grasping at nothing. He went down, not to stumble, a full fall, face first into the black mud of the pasture. Clara watched Jesse Callahan, the man who taught her to read the land by sound and feel. The man who could count cattle by their breathing and predict storms by the bend of grass, push himself up onto his hands and knees in the muck. Mud covered his face, his chest, his hands. It dripped from his chin and clung to his hair. He looked like something the earth had tried to swallow and spit back out. He didn't get up. His fingers curled into the mud. His shoulders shook, whether from cold or something else. Clara couldn't tell. "Look at me," he said. His voice was barely audible over the rain. "Can't even stand up straight. Can't keep my own fence from falling. Can't—" Clara walked over, stood in front of him. The rain hammered down between them. "You done?" He didn't answer. "Because I ain't leaving. You can push me away all you want. You can tell me I'm wasting my time. You can fall in the mud and feel sorry for yourself until the sun comes up." She crouched down, her knees sinking into the cold muck beside him. "But I ain't leaving." Jesse's hands pressed into the mud. His breath came in ragged bursts. "Why?" The word came out broken. "What's in this for you? Why stay with a man who can't even—" "You think I stayed for wages." He went still. "I stayed because that night at the dance, you were the only person in 6 months who didn't look at me like I was broken, like I was something to be pitied or fixed or pushed aside." Her voice cracked. She let it crack. "You asked me what I wanted? Nobody asks widows what they want. They tell us what we should do, how we should feel, when we should stop grieving. But you asked." The rain ran down her face. She couldn't tell anymore what was water and what wasn't. "Don't you dare send me away now." Jesse's breath came in ragged bursts. His hands released the mud. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up onto his knees. "I don't know how to need someone," he said. His voice was raw, stripped bare. "Forgot how. After the accident, I made myself stop. It hurt too much. Needing things I couldn't have anymore." Clara reached out. Her muddy fingers found his chin. Jan lifted his face toward hers, even though he couldn't see her, even though the gesture meant nothing to eyes that couldn't register light. "That makes 2 of us." The rain kept falling. The cattle lowed softly behind the wire, somewhere in the low pasture. The sick cow was still down, her calf still crying. Jessie's hand turned in the darkness, found her arm, gripped it. "The cow," he said. "We need to check on her." "I know. She might not make it through the night." "I know." They stood. The mud released them reluctantly, sucking at their boots. Clara's whole body shook with cold. Jessie's hand found her shoulder, stayed there. They walked together through the rain, back toward the low pasture where one cow lay dying and one calf waited in the dark, and where morning would bring a choice neither of them was ready to make. The first days after the storm, they moved slow. Clara's muscles ached in places she didn't know she had. Jessie's hands were raw from the wire, the skin split and healing in patches. But they moved, they worked. And piece by piece, the ranch came back together. 3 weeks changed more than Clara could have imagined. The fence posts stood straight now, all of them, even the ones in the far pasture where the old rot had set in deepest. She dug out the rotten wood herself, set new posts in fresh holes, tamped the earth down hard with the flat of a shovel. Her palms had blistered, then calloused, then grown strong. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney every morning now. The garden plot was cleared of weeds, turned over, ready for spring planting. The barn door hung true on new hinges. Jessie had forged himself at the blacksmith's portable anvil, working by touch, by the sound of hammer on iron, by the heat radiating off the metal. The sick cow had died that night in the rain. They'd found her at dawn, still and cold in the mud, the calf pressing against her flank. Clara had carried the calf back to the barn while Jessie walked beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Neither of them speaking. They'd bottle-fed the calf for 2 weeks straight, every 4 hours, day and night, taking turns so the other could sleep. The calf had lived. She was weaning now, eating grain from Clara's hand, growing stronger each day. The auction was set for the 3rd Saturday of October. Jessie had announced it at the general store a week ago, 30 head of cattle, healthy stock, Callahan Ranch. The whispers had started before he'd even finished speaking. Now Clara stood on the porch, a paintbrush in her hand, watching the sun climb over the eastern ridge. White paint dripped onto the boards beneath her feet. She'd been at this for 2 hours, working her way along the rail, covering the weathered gray with fresh color. Inside the cabin, she could hear Jessie moving around. The clink of tack, the soft creak of leather. He was getting ready. "Clara?" She set down the brush. "Out here." Jessie appeared in the doorway. He wore his Sunday coat, the one she'd brushed and mended last week, patching the worn elbows with leather from an old pair of gloves. His hat was clean, the brim straight. He'd shaved that morning. She could smell the soap. "You ready?" he asked. "Almost." She wiped her hands on a rag and looked at the rail. Half done, the white paint gleamed wet in the morning light. "I'll finish this when we get back." They saddled the horses together. The routine was smooth now, Clara describing what needed adjusting. Jessie's hands finding buckles and straps with practiced ease. When they mounted, Jessie's gray gelding turned his head toward Clara's mare, and the mare nickered softly in response. The ride to town took an hour. Clara described what she saw as they went the aspens bare now. The mountains wearing their first dusting of snow, the smoke rising from distant chimneys where families were settling in for the cold months ahead. Jessie listened, his face turned toward each thing she mentioned. "What color's your dress?" he asked. Clara looked down at the calico she'd bought with her first wages. "Blue, dark blue, with little white flowers." "Sounds nice." "It'll do." The auction yard was already crowded when they arrived. Ranchers from 3 counties had come in for the salemen in worn coats and dusty hats, women in calico and wool. Children running between the pens where cattle load and horses stamped. Clara tied the horses to the rail. Jesse dismounted on his own, his boots finding the ground without hesitation. His cane tapped the packed earth as he oriented himself. People stared. Clara felt their eyes like heat on her skin. The whispers started immediately, that same murmur she'd heard in the general store, in the boarding house, on the streets of town. That's him. The blind one. And her. The widow. Didn't think he'd show his face. Jesse walked toward the auction platform. Clara fell into step beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm. Old Tom Mercer stood by the cattle pens, his weathered face creased with age. He saw Jesse coming and removed his hat. "Mr. Callahan." He nodded. "Good to see you out." "Tom." Jesse's voice was steady. "How's that knee?" "Holding. Doc says it might last another winter or two." "Glad to hear it." They moved on. A few more nods, a few more greetings. Not everyone was friendly, but not everyone looked away either. The auctioneer climbed onto the platform and called for order. Men gathered around the pens. The bidding began. Jesse's cattle were third in the lineup. Clara had walked them in that morning, 30 head, sleek and healthy despite the hard summer. She'd brushed them down, checked their hooves, made sure they looked their best. "Next lot," the auctioneer called. "Callahan Ranch. 30 head, mixed stock." The crowd shifted. Clara felt the change in attention, everyone turning to look at Jesse, standing at the edge of the pen with his cane in his hand. "Good stock," the auctioneer continued. "Seller vouches they've been grass-fed, well-watered, healthy through the season." A man in the back raised his hand. "Starting bid, $20 a head." Another hand. 22. 25. The bids came faster now. Clara watched the faces of the buyers' ranchers who knew cattle, who could see the quality of what Jesse had raised. The numbers climbed. $30, 32, 35 a head. Final offer. The hammer came down. Jesse's cattle sold for $35 a head, top price of the day. Clara's hand found Jesse's arm. She squeezed once. He didn't smile, but something eased in the set of his shoulders. They collected the payment at the clerk's table. Silver coins, counted out and wrapped in cloth. Clara tucked the bundle into the inside pocket of her coat. "Mr. Callahan?" The voice came from behind them. Clara turned. Gideon stood there, his fine coat unbuttoned despite the cold, his hat pushed back on his head. His face was unreadable. "Didn't think you had it in you," Gideon said. Jesse's head turned toward the voice. "Lot of things you didn't think." "Gideon." A silence stretched between them. Gideon's jaw tightened. His eyes moved from Jesse to Clara, and back again. "Winter's still coming," he said finally. "One good sale doesn't change that." "No," Jesse said. "It doesn't. But it's a start." Gideon said nothing. He stood there a moment longer, his expression shifting through something Clara couldn't quite read. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd without another word. Clara watched him go. Her hand was still on Jesse's arm. "What was that about?" she asked. Jesse shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but it wasn't what I expected." They walked back to where they'd tied the horses. People watched them pass, the same people who had whispered and stared. Clara met their eyes. She didn't look away. Mrs. Harmon stood near the general store, her shawl pulled tight against the wind. Her mouth was pressed into a thin line. For once, she said nothing. Jesse climbed into the wagon seat. His hands found the reins without help, fingers settling into the familiar grooves worn by years of use. Clara climbed up beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Home?" she asked. Jesse turned his face toward the road. The mountains rose ahead of them, white-capped and still. The sky stretched endless and blue. "Home," he said. He flicked the reins. The wagon rolled forward, carrying them away from town, toward the ranch they'd saved together. Behind them, the auction continued. Cattle lowed, money changed hands. Life went on, and in the pocket of Clara's coat, wrapped in cloth, lay the silver that would carry them through winter earned fare, paid in full, owed to no one. The road home stretched long ahead of them. Clara leaned against Jesse's shoulder. He didn't move away. Somewhere behind them, the calf they'd saved was waiting in the barn. The porch rail was half-painted. The stove needed wood. There was work still to be done. There would always be work. But for now, there was just this two people on a wagon, the creak of wheels on packed dirt, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they wouldn't face it alone. The dishes sat drying on the rack beside the basin. Clara wiped her hands on the cloth and looked out the window at the fading light. The sky had gone from blue to gold to something deeper, the color of old copper, or the skin of a ripe peach. Jessie was already on the porch. She could hear the creak of the rocking chair, the soft tap of his boot against the boards. No harmonica yet, just the quiet. She hung the cloth on its hook and stepped outside. The cold hit her face first, that clean autumn cold that promised frost by morning. She pulled the quilt from the back of her chair and wrapped it around her shoulders before sitting down. Jesse's chair creaked beside her. His hands rested on his knees, empty for once. The harmonica sat on the rail beside him, catching the last of the light. "Supper was good," he said. "Beans and cornbread ain't hard to get right. Still, it was good." They sat without speaking. The wind moved through the grass in the pasture, making a sound like whispered secrets. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called one long note. Then silence. Clara watched the sun sink lower. The hills were changing color now, shifting from gold to something darker. Purple, maybe, or the deep red of dried blood. "Sun's going down," she said. "Hills are turning purple. There's a hawk circling over the east meadow." Jesse turned his face toward the meadow. His eyes didn't find the hawk, but something in his posture shifted, like he could feel the bird's shadow passing over the land. "Redtail." "I think so. Hard to tell from here." "It's him. He always hunts this time of day." The hawk made one more lazy circle, then dropped below the ridgeline and disappeared. Clara watched the space where it had been. "The mountains are getting their snow," she said. "More than last week. The peaks are all white now." Jesse nodded. "Winter's coming on fast this year. We'll need to bring the rest of the herd closer before the first real cold." "I know." The wind picked up. Clara pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. The fabric smelled of cedar, and something older, the faint ghost of lavender. Maybe, from whoever had stored it years ago. "You ever think about going back?" Jesse asked. "Nebraska." Clara's hand stilled on the quilt. "Nothing there for me. Family. Thomas's family, not mine." She paused. "My folks passed before we married. It's just me now." Jesse's chair stopped rocking. "That's a hard thing." "It is what it is." The silence stretched out between them, not uncomfortable, just full, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. "There's something here." Then Jesse asked, finally, "Something worth staying for?" Clara looked at the cabin behind them, the white paint on the porch rail, half finished, the smoke rising from the chimney, the lamp glowing warm through the window. Reckon there might be. Jesse reached for the harmonica. His fingers found it by feel. Wrapping around the cool metal, he raised it to his lips and played. The melody was the same one he'd played that first night, the one his father had taught him, the one that seemed to live in the bones of this place. But it sounded different now, slower, softer, like a question instead of a statement. Clara leaned back in her chair. The music washed over her, mixing with the wind and the distant sounds of cattle settling for the night. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the stars were coming out, thick and bright against the darkening sky, scattered like salt on a black cloth. "Stars are out," she said. Jessie lowered the harmonica. "Which ones?" Clara tilted her head back. "All of them. Feels like the Big Dipper's over the North Ridge. And there's that bright one, the one that's always first to show. Venus. That's the one." Jesse set the harmonica on his knee. His face turned toward the sky, toward the light he couldn't see. "My mother used to name them for me," he said. "When I was small, we'd sit on this porch and she'd point them out, one by one. Said the stars were like old friends, always there, even when you couldn't see them." Clara watched his face in the fading light, the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hands rested easy on his knees. "She sounds like a good woman." "She was?" The coyote called again, closer this time. Another voice answered from somewhere across the valley. "Clara?" Jesse's hand left his knee, moved through the dark air between them, found the arm of her chair, traveled up to her shoulder, stopped. "Stay." The word hung between them, simple, plain. Clara reached up. Her fingers found his hand on her shoulder, wrapped around it. "I already said I would." "No." His voice was rough. "But I needed to ask proper." She turned in her chair, faced him. Even though he couldn't see her face, his hand stayed on her shoulder, warm through the quilt. "And you, what do you look like right now?" Clara laughed. The sound surprised her, soft and real. "Like someone who ain't leaving." Jesse's other hand rose, reached toward her voice. His fingers found her face, her cheek first, then the line of her jaw. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone. Rough skin against smooth. Clara closed her eyes. Let him see her the only way he could. They sat like that for a long moment, his hand on her face, her hand on his, and the stars coming out one by one overhead. Then Jessie picked up the harmonica again. The melody drifted out across the empty land, mixing with the wind and the coyote calls and the soft sounds of the night settling in. Clara leaned against his shoulder. He didn't move away. The lamp glowed warm through the window behind them. The porch boards creaked under the rocking chairs. The mountains stood silent and white against the darkening sky. Morning would bring more work, more mending, more building. The calf needed feeding. The fence in the north pasture needed checking. The porch rail still waited, half-painted, for her to finish what she'd started. But that was tomorrow, tonight. There was only this 2 rocking chairs, a quilt, a harmonica, and the sound of 2 people learning to breathe together in the dark. The harmonica played on. The stars kept coming, and somewhere in the barn, a calf that had lost its mother lifted her head at the distant music, then settled back into the straw to sleep. Clara watched the last light fade from the western ridge. The purple deepened to black. The cold settled in around them like a blanket. Jessie's hand found hers in the darkness. Held on, neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. The music, drifted out across the land they'd saved together, note by note, breath by breath, and the night wrapped itself around them like a promise kept. There is something quiet in this story that stays with you, not loud, not demanding, just there like the weight of a hand on your shoulder when you didn't know you needed one. Many of us have stood in rooms full of people and felt alone. Some of us have lost things we cannot name sight. Love, the life we thought we would have. Perhaps you have known what it is to be passed over, unseen, waiting by a wall while the music played for everyone else. And perhaps you have also known what it is when someone crosses that distance, when a hand reaches out, when someone says, without saying it, I see you. It does not need to make sense. It does not need a lesson or a meaning. Some things simply are tender, unfinished, familiar in ways we cannot explain, and that is allowed. If something in this story sat heavy with you tonight, it is all right to let it rest there. You do not need to understand it. You only needed to hear it. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.